What if your biggest career break was actually a trap? I thought I was getting promoted, but it was a meticulously planned setup designed to take everything from me. This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about how I turned their calculated move into my ultimate game, and trust me, they never saw it coming. Before we go any deeper, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe, your support keeps these daily revenge stories coming. This journey? It's not for the faint of heart. I froze in the middle of the conference room as my boss, Damon Keller, handed me the promotion certificate with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The team cheered around me, but I felt the walls closing in. Every word out of his mouth sounded wrong, coded in something I couldn't quite name yet. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing my face into a grateful expression. This wasn't a reward. Something about this felt wrong. The way Damon's eyes gleamed when he announced my new role as senior project manager made my stomach twist. The applause felt hollow. My colleague Rachel whispered congratulations, but even she looked uncertain. I accepted the certificate with shaking hands, noticing how Damon lingered on certain words when he described my new responsibilities. The impossible workload. The tight deadlines. The high-visibility projects that could make or break careers. My heart pounded as I realized the truth. This promotion wasn't meant to lift me up. It was designed to watch me fall. I smiled wider, thanking everyone, while my mind raced with one thought: I need to be very, very careful. 2 hours later, reality hit me like a freight train. Damon called me into his office and dropped a manila folder on my desk. Inside was my first assignment as senior project manager, a complete marketing overhaul for our biggest client, due in 3 weeks. 3 weeks for work that normally took 3 months. I scanned the documents, my pulse quickening with each impossible deadline. No additional team members. No extra budget. No resources beyond what I already had access to. Just me, my laptop, and expectations that defied logic. I looked up at Damon, searching his face for some hint that this was a joke. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, watching me with barely concealed amusement. "This is your chance to prove yourself," he said smoothly. "I know you can handle it." His tone suggested he knew exactly the opposite. I forced myself to nod, gathering the folder with steady hands even though my insides were churning. As I walked back to my desk, I noticed the subtle smirks from some colleagues who had clearly been expecting this. They knew. They all knew this promotion was a trap. Walking back to my desk felt like moving through quicksand. My mind replayed every interaction with Damon over the past 6 months, and suddenly the pieces clicked into place. The vague promises about my future at the company. The way he'd been excluding me from certain meetings while including me in others. The subtle digs disguised as constructive feedback. Last month, he deliberately assigned me to work with Jennifer, a colleague notorious for taking shortcuts and shifting blame when projects went sideways. At the time, I thought it was just bad luck. Now I understood it was strategic. Damon had been building toward this moment, creating a perfect scenario where my failure would look inevitable and entirely my fault. My heart pounded as I sat down at my desk, staring at the impossible project timeline. But something else stirred inside me, something cold and calculated. If Damon thought I would crumble under pressure, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Not for the project. For documentation. Every email, every conversation, every impossible demand, I would track it all. My name is Allison Harper. I'm 29 years old, and I work at Summit Marketing, one of Denver's most competitive firms. I've been here for 4 years, working my way up from junior coordinator to marketing strategist through long hours and solid results. I'm not the type to complain or make waves. I keep my head down, do excellent work, and treat people with respect. That's probably why Damon targeted me. He saw someone he could manipulate without pushback. What he didn't see was the steel underneath my quiet demeanor. Growing up as the youngest of 4 siblings taught me how to observe, adapt, and plan 3 steps ahead. My father used to say that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, not because they're plotting harm, but because they're actually paying attention. I'd watched Damon operate for months, noticing how he pitted employees against each other, how he took credit for others' ideas, how he protected his position through manipulation rather than competence. I'd seen colleagues burn out under his leadership, their careers stalling or ending while Damon climbed higher. I swore it wouldn't happen to me. And now, sitting at my desk with an impossible project and a promotion designed to destroy me, I made a decision: I wouldn't just survive this. I would win. The first sabotage happened on day 3 of my new role. I'd spent the previous evening drafting a detailed proposal for the client campaign, carefully balancing creativity with the tight budget constraints. I saved everything to our shared drive and sent a summary email to Damon and the client contact, a woman named Lisa Morrison. The next morning, I arrived to find chaos. Lisa had sent an urgent email saying she never received my proposal. Damon forwarded it to the entire marketing team with a brief message: "Allison, please explain the delay on the Morrison account. This is unacceptable for a senior PM." My face burned as I opened my sent folder. The email was there, sent at 11:30 the previous night. But when I checked the shared drive, my proposal document was gone. Completely vanished. I sat frozen, aware that the entire office was watching me. Someone had deleted my work and made it look like I'd failed to deliver. I could feel Damon's eyes on me from across the office, waiting to see if I would panic or make excuses. Instead, I took a breath and typed a calm response, attaching a backup copy I'd saved to my personal cloud storage. A habit I'd developed years ago. Crisis averted, but I'd learned something crucial: Damon wasn't just setting me up to fail naturally. He was actively sabotaging me. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before at Summit Marketing. I reached out to colleagues I barely knew, people who had worked under Damon in the past. I started with Rachel, a talented designer who'd been demoted 6 months ago under mysterious circumstances. We grabbed coffee at the small cafe across from our office. She stirred her latte nervously before speaking. "He did the same thing to me," she admitted quietly. "The promotion, the impossible projects, the missing files. I thought I was going crazy." She'd eventually been forced to take a demotion to survive, accepting a pay cut and loss of status rather than continue fighting a rigged game. Next, I contacted Avery, who'd transferred to a different department. He met me after work, his face troubled as I explained my situation. "Damon's been doing this for years," Avery said. "He targets anyone he sees as a threat or anyone who might expose his incompetence. The pattern is always the same. Promote, sabotage, document their failures, then either force them out or demote them." As I listened to their stories, rage mixed with determination. These were good people whose careers had been damaged by one man's insecurity. But their information was invaluable. They'd given me something more important than sympathy: they'd shown me his playbook. The next impossible project landed on my desk exactly 1 week after the promotion. I'd barely finished salvaging the Morrison campaign when Damon called another meeting. This time, I was prepared. I brought my tablet, my phone charged and ready to record audio if needed, and a notepad for visible note-taking. "Allison," Damon began, his smile predatory, "we've secured a major opportunity. TechVision wants a complete rebrand: logo, website, social media strategy, print materials. Everything." My heart sank as he continued outlining the scope. It was 3 projects worth of work. "And they want to launch in 4 weeks, he finished, sliding a contract across the table. "I know it's ambitious, but I have complete faith in your abilities." The project was designed for a team of 8. I would be working alone. I looked at the timeline, my mind calculating how many 18-hour days it would take just to attempt this. Then I looked at Damon, who was watching me with barely concealed anticipation. He expected me to refuse, to say it was impossible. That would give him ammunition to call me difficult or not a team player. Instead, I smiled. "I'll need the files by end of day," I said calmly. And I'll want weekly check-ins to ensure alignment. His smile faltered slightly. He'd expected panic, not professionalism. During our first project meeting with the full team, Damon decided to test me publicly. We were gathered in the main conference room, 12 people including senior leadership. I was presenting my initial concepts for the TechVision rebrand when Damon interrupted. "Interesting approach, Allison," he said, his tone dripping with false encouragement. "Though I wonder if your leadership style might be a bit too cautious for such an aggressive timeline." Several heads turned toward me. The room went quiet. This was a test, a subtle undermining of my authority in front of people whose respect I needed. My first instinct was to defend myself, to explain my reasoning. Instead, I paused, smiled, and did something unexpected. "You're absolutely right to push for boldness, Damon," I replied smoothly. "That's why I've prepared 3 additional concepts that take bigger creative risks. Shall I walk everyone through those now?" I hadn't prepared additional concepts. But I'd learned from watching him that confidence and quick thinking mattered more than having every answer ready. The senior leadership nodded approvingly. Damon's smile tightened. For the rest of the meeting, I stayed composed, answering questions with authority while subtly deflecting Damon's attempts to undermine me. By the end, I'd earned small nods of respect from people who mattered. Damon noticed. And I could tell it bothered him more than my failure would have. 2 weeks into the TechVision project, I scored my first real victory. There was a technical problem that had been plaguing our client portal for months. Files uploaded by clients would randomly corrupt, causing delays and frustration. Damon had ignored multiple complaints about it, claiming it was IT's responsibility. During a late night at the office, I decided to investigate. I'm not a programmer, but I understand enough about systems to ask smart questions. After 3 hours and a call to a former colleague who worked in tech, I identified the issue, a conflict between our file compression software and certain document types. The fix was simple once you knew what to look for. I documented the problem and solution, then sent it to our IT department with Damon copied. The next morning, IT implemented the fix. Clients immediately noticed the improvement. During our weekly leadership meeting, our CEO mentioned the portal improvement specifically. Damon jumped in immediately. "Thank you, sir. My team identified that issue and worked with IT to resolve it." He didn't mention my name. He didn't acknowledge my work. He simply absorbed the credit as if it had always belonged to him. I watched him accept praise for my solution, my jaw clenched tight. But I didn't correct him. Not yet. Because I'd learned something important, letting him take credit now meant he'd be exposed later when the truth came out. That night, I started what would become my most important tool, a detailed documentation file. Every sabotage attempt, every moved deadline, every impossible demand, I recorded it all. I created a private cloud folder that only I could access, uploading screenshots of emails, recording dates and times of conversations, saving deleted files that I'd backed up. I documented the Morrison proposal that mysteriously disappeared, including the metadata showing when it was created and when someone else deleted it. I saved Damon's email assigning the TechVision rebrand, highlighting the scope of work and impossible timeline. I noted the meeting where he'd undermined my leadership style, including the names of witnesses present. I recorded his pattern of taking credit for others' work, starting with my portal fix but going back through months of team meetings. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. I'd watched enough colleagues get forced out of Summit marketing with damaged reputations and no evidence to defend themselves. When my time came to leave, because I was already certain I couldn't stay under Damon's leadership, I would leave on my terms with my reputation intact. The documentation was methodical, precise, and completely ethical. Everything I recorded was factual and verifiable. I wasn't manufacturing evidence or exaggerating situations. I was simply preserving the truth. Damon's confidence grew as the weeks passed. He started micromanaging my work, requesting updates every few hours and questioning minor decisions. At first, this seemed like increased scrutiny meant to catch mistakes. But I gradually realized his real intention. He was trying to take ownership of the projects. If they succeeded despite the impossible conditions, he wanted to claim the credit. If they failed, he had documentation showing he'd been heavily involved, which would let him shift blame. During one particularly intrusive phone call, Damon asked me to send him all my working files for TechVision. When I asked why, he claimed he wanted to ensure brand consistency. I sent them politely, but I also documented the request with screenshots and notes. Each intrusion became another data point in my growing file. I began to notice a pattern in his behavior. He was most aggressive when senior leadership was watching, most manipulative when he thought no one else would notice. He micromanaged publicly to appear hands-on, then sabotaged privately to ensure failure. Understanding his pattern gave me an advantage. I could predict his moves and prepare accordingly. When he scheduled unnecessary meetings, I prepared talking points that made me look competent. When he demanded sudden changes, I had backup plans ready. I was learning to play chess while he thought we were playing checkers. Everything changed when Rachel slipped me a confidential document. We were both working late, the office nearly empty except for the cleaning crew and a few dedicated workaholics. She appeared at my desk, glanced around nervously, and dropped a manila envelope next to my keyboard. Before I could ask questions, she walked away. Inside was a printed email chain from 2 years ago. The emails showed Damon using the exact same strategy on a former employee named Mitchell: the promotion, the impossible deadlines, the sabotage. Mitchell had eventually been forced to resign after a project failure that the emails proved wasn't his fault. Damon had deliberately withheld critical information from Mitchell, then documented his confusion as incompetence. Reading those emails felt like looking in a mirror. Every tactic Damon used on me, he'd used on Mitchell. Every manipulation, every setup, every strategic undermining, it was all there, documented in his own words from when he'd been less careful. But here was the crucial part: Mitchell had tried to report this to HR, and his complaint had gone nowhere. Damon had already built relationships with key HR personnel, and Mitchell's accusations had been dismissed as sour grapes from an underperforming employee. I realized then that reporting Damon through normal channels wouldn't work. He'd insulated himself too well. I needed a different strategy. My resignation wouldn't be ordinary. It would be the catalyst that brought everything into the light. The pressure mounted like a physical weight on my chest. I was working 16-hour days trying to complete impossible projects. The TechVision rebrand alone required constant attention, client calls at 7 in the morning, design revisions late into the night, endless approval chains that Damon kept adding layers to. On top of that, he assigned me 3 smaller projects with overlapping deadlines. My calendar became a maze of conflicts. Double-booked meetings were common. I started skipping lunch, eating protein bars at my desk while reviewing mock-ups. My apartment became a place I only saw for 5 hours of sleep before returning to the office. Friends stopped calling because I never had time to answer. The stress was suffocating. I could feel my body wearing down, tension headaches, tight shoulders, exhaustion that went bone deep. But I compartmentalized the pain. Every morning, I looked in the mirror and reminded myself this wasn't forever. This was temporary suffering in service of a larger plan. I watched colleagues notice my decline, saw their sympathetic glances. Some probably thought I was in over my head. Others recognized what was happening but felt powerless to help. The office gossip mill churned with speculation about how long I would last. Damon watched it all with satisfaction. He thought he was breaking me. What he didn't realize was that I was documenting every unreasonable demand, every impossible deadline, every moment of deliberate sabotage. His victory was temporary. Mine would be permanent. I made a calculated decision to show weakness during a crucial client presentation. The Morrison account was up for renewal, and Damon had scheduled a meeting with Lisa Morrison and her executive team to discuss continuing our partnership. I'd prepared extensively, but during the presentation, I deliberately stumbled over a minor statistic. Nothing major, just a small mistake that made me pause and correct myself. It was the kind of human error that happens in every presentation. But Damon seized on it immediately. "I apologize for the confusion," he interjected smoothly, taking over my explanation. "Let me clarify those numbers for you, Lisa." He spent the next 10 minutes showcasing his knowledge, effectively pushing me to the sidelines of my own presentation. Lisa and her team barely looked at me after that. They directed all their questions to Damon, who answered with confident authority. To everyone watching, it looked like I'd fumbled and needed rescuing. Damon practically glowed with satisfaction. After the meeting, he pulled me aside for a performance discussion, his tone dripping with false concern. "No worries, Allison. Everyone has off days. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed?" I assured him I was fine, apologizing for the mistake while internally smiling. Because what Damon didn't know was that I'd recorded the entire meeting. I had video proof of a minor, easily correctable error that he'd blown out of proportion. More importantly, I'd shown him exactly what he wanted to see: weakness. And arrogant people make their biggest mistakes when they think they've already won. My strategy of appearing to struggle while secretly building competence started paying dividends. During a team brainstorming session for a new client pitch, I proposed an idea but framed it carefully. I started by saying, "I'm building on Damon's earlier insight about authentic storytelling," then outlined a comprehensive campaign strategy that was entirely my own work. The team loved it. Damon beamed, accepting praise for the concept he'd had nothing to do with. Our creative director, a sharp woman named Margaret, gave me a knowing look across the table. She'd noticed the careful attribution, recognized what I was doing. After the meeting, she stopped by my desk. "Smart move in there," she said quietly. "For what it's worth, some of us see what's happening." Her support was subtle but meaningful. I wasn't completely alone. Over the following weeks, I continued this strategy. I would propose strong ideas but wrap them in language that gave Damon plausible credit. This served two purposes: it kept him satisfied and less likely to actively sabotage me, and it created a paper trail showing that the good ideas came from me even if he claimed otherwise. Every email I sent about these concepts included phrases like "as discussed with Damon" or "building on our earlier conversation," with timestamps and details that proved I'd originated the thinking. When the truth came out, these emails would show exactly who had been driving success. Something unexpected started happening around the office. Colleagues began noticing my composure under pressure. While Damon had expected me to crack publicly, I remained professionally calm no matter what fires erupted. When a vendor missed a critical deadline for tech vision, threatening our launch schedule, I didn't panic. I calmly contacted backup vendors, negotiated rush production, and had a solution implemented before the client even knew there was a problem. When Jennifer, my colleague who was notorious for cutting corners, tried to shift blame for a mistake onto me during a meeting, I simply pulled up my email chain showing I'd flagged the issue 3 days earlier. No drama, no accusations, just facts. People noticed. The junior staff started asking me questions about project management. Other team members requested my input on their challenges. Even some senior leadership began acknowledging my contributions directly rather than filtering everything through Damon. I could see this bothered him intensely. His jaw would tighten when someone praised my work. His eyes would narrow when I solved problems efficiently. He'd built his reputation partly on being the go-to problem solver, the indispensable manager. My competence threatened that narrative. But he'd painted himself into a corner. He'd promoted me to a senior role. If he now claimed I was incompetent, it would reflect poorly on his judgment. So instead, he ramped up the sabotage, trying to create failures significant enough that my growing reputation couldn't overcome them. He had no idea that every escalation was adding to my documentation. The turning point came from an unexpected source, a forwarded email that landed in my inbox by mistake. Our IT department was doing a server migration, and somehow email routing got confused. I received a message thread between Damon and Jennifer that was clearly never meant for my eyes. The emails revealed their collaboration. Jennifer had been deliberately undermining my projects at Damon's request, missing deadlines, providing incorrect information to clients, creating confusion that made me look disorganized. In exchange, Damon had promised her the senior position she'd been hoping for. Seeing it spelled out so clearly in writing felt like ice water in my veins. The betrayal wasn't surprising, but the casual cruelty of it, the way they discussed sabotaging my career like it was just another business transaction, made my hands shake as I read. I immediately forwarded the email chain to my personal account, then my secure cloud backup. This wasn't just evidence of Damon's manipulation anymore. This was proof of deliberate, coordinated sabotage with another employee. This changed everything. I sat at my desk, staring at my screen, and made a decision. My resignation wasn't enough anymore. When I left Summit Marketing, I wouldn't just be protecting myself. I would be preventing Damon from doing this to anyone else. The documentation I'd been building suddenly had a new purpose. It wasn't just my exit strategy, it was a reckoning. The TechVision rebrand nearly broke me. We were 3 days from launch when the client suddenly requested major changes to the logo design. Not minor tweaks. A complete reimagining that would require scrapping weeks of work. The email came at 7 in the evening. I sat in my apartment, staring at my laptop screen, feeling my chest tighten. This was impossible. Even with a full team working around the clock, delivering this in 3 days would be a miracle. For me alone, it was career suicide. My pulse raced. My hands started shaking. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt actual tears threatening. I was so tired. Physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted. Part of me wanted to just quit right then, to send a resignation email and walk away from the whole toxic situation. But I'd come too far. I'd endured too much. I took 3 deep breaths, then opened my documentation folder. I saved the client's email request, noting the timestamp and impossible timeline. I documented my immediate response to Damon, flagging the issue and requesting guidance. Then I did something I'd never done before. I sent a carefully worded email to Margaret, our creative director, explaining the situation and asking if emergency resources were available. Margaret responded within an hour. She'd speak to leadership about getting me help. More importantly, she copied HR on her response, creating a record that I'd asked for appropriate support when faced with an impossible situation. Damon's trap was becoming visible to others. I just had to survive 3 more days. Help came from an unexpected alliance. Margaret pulled 2 junior designers from other projects to assist with TechVision. But more significantly, Rachel and Avery, my colleagues who'd shared their stories about Damon, started quietly supporting me. Rachel stayed late to help coordinate vendor relationships. Avery, despite working in a different department, offered feedback on messaging strategies. They weren't doing this because they expected anything in return. They were doing it because they recognized that I was fighting a battle they'd lost. Because they wanted to see someone finally stand up to Damon successfully. During a midnight work session, Rachel brought coffee and sat down across from me in the empty office. "We all know what he's doing to you," she said quietly. "Some of us have been talking. When you're ready to make your move, you'll have support." I looked at her, surprised. How many people knew the truth about Damon? More than I'd realized, apparently. Over the next few days, I discovered a quiet network of current and former employees who'd been damaged by Damon's manipulations. They shared information, warned each other about his tactics, and now they were cautiously offering to help me. Their support gave me something crucial: validation. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't overreacting. What was happening to me was real, systematic, and wrong. And together, we might actually be able to stop it. The TechVision rebrand launched successfully despite every obstacle. The client loved the final product, praising the creativity and attention to detail. Our CEO sent a company-wide email celebrating the achievement. In that email, he mentioned my name specifically, exceptional work by our senior project management team, led by Allison Harper. It was the first time I'd received direct recognition from leadership. I should have felt triumph. Instead, I felt exhausted and increasingly certain of what I needed to do. That same afternoon, I started quietly training other team members on processes Damon had deliberately kept opaque. I documented project workflows, created templates for client communications, and shared organizational systems I'd developed. To anyone watching, it looked like good team leadership, sharing knowledge and building capacity. But I had another motive. When I left, I wanted the team to be able to function without chaos. I wanted to remove any excuse Damon might have about my departure creating problems. More importantly, by training others and documenting processes, I was demonstrating competence and leadership. People were learning that the successful projects weren't happening despite me, they were succeeding because of me. The narrative Damon had tried to build about my incompetence was crumbling. And he knew it. I could see his growing frustration, the way his jaw clenched when colleagues thanked me for helping them. His trap had failed. Now he was scrambling to figure out how to save face while still forcing me out. But I wasn't going to give him that chance. I submitted my resignation on a Tuesday morning at 9:15. The email was brief and professional. Dear Damon, thank you for the opportunity to serve as senior project manager. I'm resigning effective immediately. Please see the attached documentation for transition purposes. The attached documentation wasn't project files or client contact lists. It was a comprehensive folder containing 6 months of evidence, every sabotaged email, every impossible deadline, every documented manipulation. Screenshots of the forwarded IT email showing coordination with Jennifer. Recordings of meetings where Damon had undermined me publicly. The email chain from 2 years ago showing his identical pattern with Mitchell. Detailed timelines showing how project requirements had been changed deliberately to create failure scenarios. Testimonials from Rachel, Avery, and 3 other colleagues describing similar treatment. Financial analysis showing that projects I'd managed had actually been profitable despite Damon's claims otherwise. I'd organized everything professionally, with dates, sources, and context. Nothing inflammatory, nothing emotional, just facts, meticulously documented. I sent copies to HR, our CEO, and Margaret in the creative department. Then I copied the entire file to a secure external drive, sent it to my personal email, and backed it up in 3 separate cloud locations. My heart pounded as I hit send. There was no taking this back. But I felt something I hadn't felt in months, relief. The pretending was over. The trap Damon had set had finally sprung, just not on the person he'd intended. The shockwave hit within an hour. I was packing my personal items. Family photos, the plant on my desk, a coffee mug from my previous company, when I heard Damon's office door slam. His voice carried across the office, muffled but clearly angry, speaking to someone on the phone. Then silence. 20 minutes later, an HR representative I'd never met appeared at my desk. Ms. Harper, could you come with me please? She led me to a conference room where 2 other HR staff waited, along with Margaret and our company's legal counsel. For 2 hours, they asked questions about my documentation. I answered everything calmly, providing additional context where needed. The HR director, a woman named Patricia, looked increasingly grim as she reviewed the evidence. This is quite extensive, she said finally. How long have you been compiling this? Since the day I was promoted, I replied. I recognized the pattern from stories I'd heard from other colleagues. Patricia exchanged glances with the legal counsel. Other colleagues? Yes. Rachel, Avery, and several others who've experienced similar treatment under Damon's management. They can corroborate everything in my documentation. The room fell silent as the full scope of the situation became clear to them. This wasn't one disgruntled employee making accusations. This was a pattern of behavior with multiple victims and extensive evidence. Margaret spoke up. I've witnessed several of these incidents personally. Allison's documentation is accurate. I felt a wave of gratitude toward her for that public support. The legal counsel began taking detailed notes. My resignation was no longer a simple departure. It had become an investigation. By late afternoon, the entire office atmosphere had shifted. Word spread quickly. In a company of 60 people, secrets were impossible to keep. Colleagues watched with barely concealed curiosity as Damon was called into a closed-door meeting with HR and senior leadership. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Jennifer disappeared into a separate conference room for her own interview. I'd been asked to remain available, so I sat in the break room, nursing coffee and answering occasional texts from colleagues asking what was happening. Rachel sat with me for a while, saying nothing, just providing quiet support. Around 5:30, Patricia found me. Ms. Harper, we've reviewed your documentation thoroughly. I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We would like you to reconsider your immediate resignation. Would you be willing to discuss a different arrangement? I'd anticipated this. They didn't want me to leave angry with this much evidence, potentially filing lawsuits or damaging their reputation. I understand your concern, I replied calmly. But I've made my decision. I will, however, agree not to pursue legal action or speak publicly about this situation if the company addresses the pattern of behavior I've documented and ensures it doesn't continue. Patricia nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. We'll need a few days to complete our investigation, but I can tell you that immediate changes are being implemented. The next morning, I learned what those changes were. Damon had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Jennifer had been moved to a different department with a formal warning in her file. I walked out of Summit Marketing for the last time on Thursday afternoon. My desk was clear, my files transferred, my badge surrendered at reception. The 2-week notice period had been waived by mutual agreement. The company didn't want me present during the investigation, and I had no desire to stay. As I headed toward the elevator, colleagues stopped me. Some offered quiet thanks. Others apologized for not speaking up sooner. Rachel hugged me tightly. You did what none of us were brave enough to do, she whispered. I hadn't felt brave. I'd felt trapped and angry and determined not to let that trap destroy me. But maybe that was what bravery actually looked like, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear control your choices. Margaret caught me at the elevator. I've already put out feelers about you in the industry, she said. When you're ready to work again, you'll have options. That kindness, after months of Damon's cruelty, almost broke my composure. I thanked her and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the office where I'd spent 4 years. Where I'd grown professionally. Where I'd learned hard lessons about workplace politics and the importance of documentation. Where I'd discovered I was stronger than I'd ever realized. The doors closed, and I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't a defeat. This was liberation. 3 weeks after my resignation, I met Rachel and Avery for dinner at a small restaurant downtown. They updated me on the aftermath at Summit Marketing. Damon had been quietly let go after the investigation confirmed everything in my documentation. Several former employees had come forward with their own stories once they learned someone had finally been believed. Jennifer had been given a final warning about her conduct. More importantly, the company had implemented new policies for reporting workplace harassment and unfair treatment, with oversight from an external firm. My documentation hadn't just protected me, it had created systemic change. But the best news came from an unexpected source. Margaret had recommended me to a former colleague who was launching a marketing consultancy. They offered me a position as their director of client strategy. Better pay, better hours, and a company culture that valued integrity over office politics. I accepted. 2 months after leaving Summit Marketing, I was thriving in a way I never had before. I worked with clients who respected my expertise. I collaborated with colleagues who supported rather than sabotaged each other. I led projects with reasonable timelines and adequate resources. What Damon had intended as my professional destruction had instead freed me to find something better. The trap he'd set had backfired spectacularly. Sometimes the hardest moments teach the most important lessons. Know your worth, document everything, trust your instincts, and understand that staying silent protects the wrong people. I'd walked through fire and emerged stronger. And Damon? He became a cautionary tale whispered about in Denver's marketing community, a reminder that arrogance and manipulation might work temporarily, but integrity and preparation win in the end. Sometimes the smartest revenge isn't fighting back, it's staying calm, documenting everything, and walking away at the exact moment your silence speaks loudest. When you know your worth, you don't need to beg for fairness, you build a better future without them. Have you ever been set up or treated unfairly at work like this? Drop a comment and share your story. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done in her place?